Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight?
Aha!
Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Thanks for listening to the Red Treehouse, where I tell you scary stories to keep you up at night. You can listen to the Red Treehouse wherever you stream podcasts. Just be sure to follow, like, and subscribe. Oh, and leave a 5-star review. An important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. With Halloween behind us and the Christmas season up ahead, there's a part of me that wants to tell you the scariest Christmas and winter-themed stories to keep you up at night. But while researching, I came across a real-life possession and exorcism story that sent a chill down my back and had me looking over my shoulder. The case of Gottliebin Dittus not only involves possible demonic possession, but also poltergeist activity. A seemingly devout Christian, she seemed like the least likely person to become possessed. And yet, for over 175 years, her case has been one of the most well-known and horrifying. In this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're going to explore the genuinely scary possession and exorcism of Gottliebin Dittus. Was she truly possessed by demons, or were the scary phenomena caused by something else more natural? I'll share the story. You decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Welcome to the Red Treehouse. The story of Gottliebin Dittus takes place in a small German village of Mottlingen in the mid-19th century. In the summer of 1838, Johann Christoph Blumhardt was called to pastor a small Lutheran church in Mottlingen. Despite his best efforts, the church was in danger of closing its doors, and one article stated, quote, "His predecessor commented on how the place was a sleepy area, which greatly resisted any good news being preached, with his congregation often falling asleep in the pews." End quote. Sometime in either late 1841 or early 1842, different sources cite different dates, a young woman, Gottliebin Dittus, began exhibiting strange behaviors, leading some to believe she had a nervous disorder. Gottliebin was a God-fearing woman who was described as, quote, being especially alert in an inner way and receptive to deeper insights, end quote. Not much is known about her childhood, though she was considered a sickly child who struggled with various ailments. As an adult, Gottliebin lived with 3 siblings, Anna Maria, Katharina, and Hans-Jörg, in a, quote, tumble-down house under conditions of extreme poverty, end quote. Gottliebin's health issues took front and center when she began having what appeared to be epileptic seizures, would fall into trances, some of which lasted for several hours, and exhibited a different personality. One article stated, quote, "During these episodes, witnesses claimed that she exhibited strange, terrifying behavior. She would speak in languages she had never learned, and contort her body in bizarre, unnatural ways. At times, her voice wasn't her own. People swore she was speaking with the voice of a demon." End quote. Eventually, Gottliebin's scary behavior reached the ears of Johann Blumhardt. Something interesting. In 1850, he published an eyewitness account of his interactions with Gottliebin Dittus, entitled Blumhardt's Battle, a Conflict with Satan. From this point forward, I'll intersperse his words to help tell the story. Even before Blumhardt was made aware of Gottliebin's strange behavior, the two had some history, as she had a strong negative reaction to his preaching when he first arrived in Mottlingen. Despite this, she regularly attended church, which took considerable effort and determination, considering it was a walk of several miles. The first sign that something was off was back at home, when Gottliebin fell unconscious when the words, "Come Lord Jesus and be our guest," were said at the end of a mealtime prayer. Then, strange and scary occurrences drew the attention of her neighbors. The phenomena included random thumping, banging, the shuffling of invisible feet, visions of small figures and lights, and the aforementioned contortions and demonic voices. Eventually, the neighbors reached out to Blumhardt, who initially dismissed the claims. But the more time that passed, the more the strange phenomenon built up, and he eventually visited Gottliebin at her home. And as you can imagine, she was less than enthusiastic about his coming to see her. Eventually, though, she, quote, confessed some of her past wrongful activities to him, end quote. These confessions, however, were vague and left him uncertain of how to help her. The two continued to meet, and he recounted that, quote, she believed to have felt a peculiar influence on her. She thought she saw and heard many weird and sinister things. She heard a frequently recurring trampling and scuffling in the bedroom, the living room, and the kitchen. At night, her hands were folded by force, end quote. Gottliebin would also demonstrate unusual behavior in Blumhardt's presence, often refusing to look him in the eyes and keeping her hands apart during prayer. Sensing something was off, Blumhardt tried to keep his distance, and though ill for some time, Gottliebin eventually recovered while under a physician's care. All seemed well. Then, in April 1842, two of Gottliebin's relatives went to Blumhardt for advice. The neighborhood was hearing strange trampling coming from inside Gottliebin's home, and she claimed to have been visited by the ghost of a dead woman holding a dead child in her arms. The woman would stand at the foot of Gottliebin's bed and say aloud, "I want to be left alone," or "Give me a paper and I won't come back." Concerned, Blumhardt strongly advised Gottliebin's relatives to avoid communicating with the spirit, as he believed it could be deceiving them. And he encouraged Gottliebin to, quote, pray seriously and faithfully, and the whole thing would stop by itself after a while, end quote. He also recommended that someone sleep in the room with Gottliebin. A friend of Gottliebin's took this advice and heard the trampling for herself. And that's not all. The two discovered a piece of paper under a bed, covered in soot and written on with strange lettering. The next night, the trampling returned, and this time the women discovered items buried behind the stove, including chalk, salt, and bones. And after a while, the trampling was no longer heard just at night. Passers-by walking outside the home heard it during the day. Gottliebin's physician, Dr. Spath, agreed to spend 2 nights in the living room and was overwhelmed by what he experienced, leading Blumhardt to, quote, make nightly investigations in the house. I made a secret arrangement with the mayor of the town and several men of the town council, altogether some 6 to 8 men, end quote. The men divided into groups of 2 and arrived at Gottliebin's house, unannounced, at approximately 10 p.m. Blumhardt detailed what happened next. Quote, as soon as I entered the living room, 2 immense bangs met me from the bedroom. In a short time, others followed. Noises, bangs, and knockings of the most varied kind were heard, mostly in the bedroom, where Gottliebin lay on her bed, fully dressed, end quote. Over the course of 3 hours, Blumhardt recorded 25 bangs in a specific spot in the bedroom, quote, so loud that the chair leaped, the windows rattled, and sand fell from the ceiling, end quote. At 1 a.m., Gottliebin asked Blumhardt if she could speak to the ghost if it appeared, but was urged against it, as Blumhardt was concerned about his team and conversing with a possible demonic entity. The next day, after attending church service, a small crowd gathered outside Gottliebin's home. She'd fainted after seeing the ghost with the dead child in her living room. That same day, Blumhardt and a group of men dug up the spot where they'd heard the banging the night before. As one of the floorboards was pulled up, quote, "A flame shot up there," end quote, and they discovered small pieces of paper, powder, money, and a pot containing small bones and dirt. One man in the group, a gravedigger, claimed the bones belonged to a small child, but when they were taken to the chief medical examiner, Blumhardt was told they were the bones of a bird. Blumhardt determined they must have been part of a black magic ritual, as, quote, "Birds, and especially ravens, are frequently used by the common people in a superstitious way for the purpose of secret magic," end quote. Blumhardt then encouraged Gottliebin and her siblings to move out of the home and arranged accommodations for them, and they did not return until the middle of the following year. Gottliebin's absence, however, did little to quell the neighborhood's interest, and for some time, crowds and tourists gathered outside the house, and more than a few wanted to spend the night, hoping to find evidence of the supernatural. Blumhardt claimed the trampling noises in the house did not completely stop until 1844, and was noticeably more violent during times of prayer. It seems, though, the strange phenomenon followed Gottliebin to her new home, and Blumhardt noticed that her convulsions grew more frequent and violent, and that Gottliebin claimed to see, quote, "something floating in front of her eyes that made her rigid," end quote. Blumhardt prayed with her, and almost immediately the tension in Gottliebin's body released, causing her to faint and fall onto the bed. As the convulsions grew in frequency, intensity, and duration, Blumhardt noted, quote, "She twisted her arms, turned her head to the side, and bent her body up high. Foam flowed from her mouth," end quote. Then, he made an important and potentially life-altering determination, quote, "It had become clear to me that something demonic played a role here after what had happened so far, and it hurt me to think that there should be no means or help in such a horrible affair," end quote. As the epiphany settled in, Blumhardt jumped up, grabbed Gottliebin's stiff hands, and pulled her fingers together for prayer, stating, quote, "Fold your hands and pray, Lord Jesus, help me. We have seen long enough what the devil is doing. Now we also want to see what God can do," end quote. To the surprise of those in the room, Gottliebin prayed, and her convulsions ended. At that moment, Blumhardt was convinced that his suspicions of demonic possession were true, and though his actions brought some relief to Gottliebin, within a short time, her convulsions started again, this time more violent than before, and they persisted for quite some time. During these convulsions, quote, "Something hostile in her was directing itself against me. Her eyes opened widely. She made a horrible face which did not express anything but wrath and rage. She clenched her fists and made threatening motions at me. Then she held her open hands close to my eyes, as if she wanted to rip out both of my eyes quickly," end quote. Blumhardt prayed, which brought temporary relief. But after a short time, and suddenly without warning, Gottliebin fell back as if being struck on the chest, and claimed to see the ghost of the woman holding the dead child. Then, quote, "It seemed as if something went into her, and her whole body got into motion. I then prayed and mentioned the name of Jesus. Immediately she rolled her eyes, hanged her hands together, and said with a voice which could instantly be recognized as not being hers, not only because of the tone, but because of the expression and character of it, 'I cannot stand to hear that name,' end quote. Uncertain of what to do next, Blumhardt attempted to communicate with the spirit. Quote, "Do you rest in the grave?" "No." "Why not?" "That is the reward for my deeds." "Didn't you, I continued, silently supposing that it was that person. "Confess all of your sins to me." "No. I murdered 2 children and buried them in the field." "Don't you know of any help now? Can't you pray?" "I cannot pray." "Don't you know Jesus who forgives sins?" "I can't stand to hear that name." "Are you alone?" "No." "Who is with you?" The voice answered with hesitation, then with a rush, "The worst of all." End quote. The spirit of the dead woman claimed to have been a practitioner of black magic whose soul belonged to the devil. It claimed to have been cast out of Gottliebin 7 times already, but that it would no longer depart from her after this. Blumhardt commanded the spirit to come out, and like before, Gottliebin fainted on the bed and the spirit seemed to have departed. Except a few days later, the spirit returned, and this time, it didn't come alone. According to Blumhardt, quote, "Soon it appeared that on this wise 3, then 7, finally 14 demons came out. Gottliebin's face changed each time and assumed a new threatening expression toward me." End quote. Those present for the exorcism were physically assaulted, and they watched helplessly as Gottliebin tore her hair out, threw herself against the wall, and tried to hurt herself repeatedly. Yet, Blumhardt claimed he was able to cast the demons out each time. Except each time, they came back in greater numbers. First 1, then 3, then 7, then 14, then 175, and finally 425 demons. And each time Blumhardt visited Gottliebin, she claimed to see an increasing number of figures standing beside her bed, and they were aggressive, leaving burn marks on her neck and back, hitting her on the head all day and night, and tripping her as she walked, resulting in bruises and other injuries. The exorcisms went on for some time, with periods of calm scattered in between. But each time, the spirits came back with a greater vengeance than before, tiring Blumhardt and giving him great concern for Gottliebin's well-being. And he noted, quote, "One could clearly see that she was becoming more emaciated every day during that time." End quote. One Friday morning, Blumhardt detailed the scariest incident of Gottliebin's affliction. Quote, "The dreaded Friday was the following day. It was the day on which, after a drought of several months, the first thunderstorm appeared in the sky. An unforgettable day for me. When the patient walked through the door of her cousin's house at 6 o'clock in the evening, the figures, as she told it, fell on her. Strong hemorrhages began. She rushed to her own home to change her clothes, and while she was sitting on a chair there, it seemed to her as if she had to swallow something continually. After a few moments, this caused her to be beside herself. She rushed like mad through both rooms and heatedly demanded a knife. Her frightened brother and sister would not allow a knife to get into her hands. Then she ran to the attic, jumped on the windowsill, and already stood outside the window in free air, only holding on with one hand on the inside, when the first flash of lightning of the approaching thunderstorm met her eye, frightened and awakened her. She came to and cried, 'For God's sake, I don't want to do that.' And in the resulting delirium, she took hold of a rope. Where she got it, she cannot explain to this day, and tied it skillfully around the beams of the attic. She made a noose which easily pulled tight. She had nearly forced her whole head into the noose when a second flash of lightning caught her eye through the window. As before, it brought her back to consciousness. A stream of tears flowed from her eyes the following day when she looked at the noose hanging from the beam. She could never have tied it as skillfully in the best of consciousness. Now she remained somewhat awake and crawled the short distance to her cousin's house. She was extremely exhausted from the continuing hemorrhages. All she could do was to get up the stairs to the chamber in the attic where she slept at that time. She fell unconscious into her bed. Now I was called. The thunderstorm had already begun. It was toward 8 o'clock at night. I found her swimming in blood, which forced itself through her dress everywhere on the upper part of her body. The first words of consolation which I called out to her had the effect that she came to a little and cried, "Oh, the figures. Do you see them?" I asked. The answer was a wailing groan. Then I began to pray seriously while the thunder rolled outside. What I said, I do not know anymore, but the effect after a quarter of an hour was so decisive that she called out, "Now they are gone." Soon she came to completely, and I went out for a few moments until she had changed her dress. There was only praise and gratitude among us when we saw her so totally changed, sitting on her bed. From that day on, the above-mentioned plague ceased. Only a few times afterwards did she still see figures as if trying to fall upon her. However, beside that nothing occurred again, until this too stopped. Whatever the matter was, she was helped. The relief was short-lived, and soon enough, the demons returned. Quote, "While I prayed a short prayer, it broke out of her with sneering laughter and said, 'You did the right thing that you did not leave. You would have lost and lost all.' I did not pay much attention to what was said and acted and spoke in the usual way. Suddenly the wrath and ill humor of the demons broke loose with full strength, and many statements like the following were heard, mostly in a howling and wailing voice. 'Now everything is lost. Now everything is betrayed. You disturb us thoroughly. The whole alliance goes to pieces. All is over. Everything is confusion. It is your fault with your constant praying. Woe, woe, you will yet drive us out. All is lost. We are 1,067, and those who are still alive are many too.' Of those who are still alive, they said, one should warn them. Woe to them. Woe, they are lost." At this point I interjected. Those who are still alive can be converted. God may still save them. At the present moment, the demons showed nothing but despair because they were sure that their way led into the abyss. The roaring of the demons, the flashing of the lightning bolts, the rolling thunder, the splashing of the downpour, the seriousness of those present, the prayers I prayed, upon which the demons came out in the way previously mentioned, all of that made a scene no one could imagine in any way corresponding to reality." End quote. By this point, Blumhardt believed the demons were ever present with Gottliebin, and he noted that one seemed to have control over the others, a spirit who was, quote, "always found full of wrath and rage, and always in deliberations as to how to protect themselves against attacks made against them through the Word of God." End quote. Then, on February 8, 1843, something changed. Quote, "From then on, even more definite forms and effects of the most varied magic came to my observation. I was aghast to realize that everything which thus far had been held among the most ridiculous popular beliefs stepped out of the world of fairy tales into reality. First, I will summarize all the appearances in the area of magic which occurred during the course of the year 1843. It was shown that things without number in the body of Gottliebin had been, to use the only word possible, charmed into her body, all with the intent to put her out of this world. It started with vomiting up sand and small pieces of glass. After a while, all sorts of pieces of iron came out, especially old and bent board nails. Once, after much retching, 12 of these fell into the bowl held under her, right before my eyes. Gottliebin also vomited shoe buckles of varied sizes and forms, often so large that one could hardly understand how they could even come up her throat. Once, an especially large and broad piece of iron came, at which her breath stopped, and she lay as dead for several minutes. Besides those, an uncountable amount of pins, needles, and pieces of knitting needles came out, often single, when the going was hardest, and often in masses, tied together with feathers and paper. Often it looked as though the knitting needles had been drawn across through her head, from one ear to the other, and once several finger-long pieces came out at the ear. At another occasion, when I was laying on hands, I could feel how the needles broke in the head or turned and bent together. Those were steel needles which then slowly eased their way towards her throat and came out at the mouth. These iron needles could be bent and finally, bent 3 or 4 times but whole, found their way out of the mouth. I also pulled many pins out of the nose which had eased their way down from above, the points heading down. I had first felt them lying across over the nose bone. Once, 15 of these pins came out of her nose with such violence that all of them got stuck in Gottliebin's hand, which she had held to her nose. At another time, she complained much of a headache, and when I laid on hands, I saw white points shimmering everywhere. There were 12 pins which were still half in her head, and half which I pulled out one by one while she showed her pains by jerking each time. Once, I pulled 2, then again 4 pins out of her eye, which moved around under her eyelids for a long time until they came out a little so that they could be pulled out with care. Furthermore, I pulled out a lot of needles out of all parts of the upper and lower jaws. At first, she would feel terrific pains in her teeth, but nothing could be seen for a long time until finally the points could be felt. Then, as they came out more and more, and I could finally take hold of them, much strength was still needed to pull them out all the way. 2 old, finger-long pieces of wire showed themselves in the tongue, and it cost time and pains until they were taken out completely. 2 long, bent pieces of wire were wrapped around her womb under the skin. My wife and I needed about an hour until they had all come out while Gottliebin fainted more than once, which, by the way, happened many times. In addition, whole knitting needles and halves came so frequently and at different times out of all parts of her upper body that I estimate there were at least 30. Sometimes they came out crooked, sometimes straight, in the latter case especially out of her pericardium. Often when the needles were already half out, I still had to do about a half an hour worth of pulling with all my strength. Also other things, such as needles of all lengths, large pieces of glass, small stones, and once a long piece of iron came out of the upper part of her body. I cannot really think it wrong if anybody is suspicious of the above report, since everything goes beyond all we can think or understand. But the continuous observations and experiences of nearly 1 whole year allow me to tell these things freely and boldly. I always had several eyewitnesses with me. I insisted upon this without fail in order to prevent evil rumors. I am completely sure, which I have to be in regard to Gottliebin's character, that not the least fraud occurred nor could occur. However often I visited her during that time, called or uncalled, there was always something going. And after a while, an object of magic would work its way out of her body. Each time, the pain was so terrific that she would more or less lose consciousness. Usually she would say, "I cannot stand this. This is my death." But everything could be brought out only through prayer. When she began to complain that she had pain somewhere, I had only to lay on hands, usually on her head, and because I was exercised in the faith through long experience, I was sure that I would experience the power of prayer which I spoke with a few words. Then she would begin to feel the thing start moving or turning, trying to find an exit. The most difficult part was through the outer skin. Often, one could feel for a long time how something was pressing from the inside to the outside. Blood never flowed, nor was a wound caused. The most one could see for a while was the spot where some object had worked itself out, but only if it was taken out by prayer. Sometimes, however, she would cut her skin and be overwhelmed by the pain, when I was not there. These wounds could hardly ever be healed. There were so many objects that I could not enumerate them all. The only other thing I will mention is that even living animals came out of her mouth, but I never had opportunity to see them. Once, 4 of the largest locusts came out and were taken alive to a meadow, where they quickly jumped away. At another time, 6 to 8 bats, one of which was beaten to death, came out. The others fled quickly. At still another time, a friend of hers pulled out of her throat an immensely large frog. Finally, Gottliebin saw briefly a mysterious serpent of the adder family, and of the most dangerous kind, come out, but no one else saw it. Yet, I did think I had seen a quickly moving shimmering streak gliding from her mouth over the bed. This adder caused her a wound on her neck soon after it had come out of her mouth, and at another time it stung her so violently on her foot while she was sitting at the table with the family that the bleeding nearly did not stop. Both wounds caused her so much pain for several months, and it could clearly be seen that they were dangerous, poisonous wounds. I cannot close this part of the account of the battle without at least telling especially of one case of the most hideous kind. At the beginning of December of 1843, Gottliebin had a case of nosebleeding which did not want to stop. When she had just lost a bowl of blood, it started all over again. It is inconceivable how her life could be maintained with such an immense loss of blood. The striking thing was that the blood always had a pungent smell and looked especially black. The doctor visited her in this need and prescribed something, but hardly had any hope himself that the medication would have any effect. Then, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, on a walk to the daughter church which led me by her house, I visited her. She had just changed her clothes and was sitting in a chair exhausted. Also, the living room had just been cleaned of blood which had flowed freely in the morning. She showed me several spots on her head and said that something was in there and that if it did not come out, she would have to die. I could not feel anything special and told her that I would not see her until after my return because I was in a hurry. After me, Dr. Spath, the doctor, came. He remained with her for 2 hours and had her tell him a lot of things. He too could feel something hard at the places she mentioned. She sensed that something was going to happen and wanted to wait until it was over, but he was suddenly called to a childbirth in a neighboring town. Around 4 o'clock, I was nearing the town again when a messenger rushed toward me and said I was to hurry to Gottliebin. I sped there, and to my horror, I could see the people everywhere looking out of their windows and crying to me, "Pastor, there is a great need." I entered. A suffocating vapor of blood almost drove me out again. Gottliebin sat in the middle of the small living room, with a bucket in front of her, which was about half filled with blood and water. The whole length of the living room behind and in front of her was covered with blood. She herself was completely covered with blood so that one could hardly recognize her clothing. Just think, blood running quickly out of both of her ears, both of her eyes, and her nose, and even out of the upper part of her head. That was the most gruesome thing I have ever seen. End quote. The demonic attacks continued, with Gottliebin growing worse by the day. That is, until December 1843, when the spirits attacked Gottliebin's sister, Katharina. This time, the exorcisms occurred over a 4-day period, from December 24th to the 28th, during which Gottliebin convulsed violently. Suddenly, quote, "At 2 o'clock in the morning, the supposed angel of Satan roared, and upper part of her body back over the backrest of the chair, with a voice of which one could hardly have believed a human throat capable. 'Jesus is victor! Jesus is victor!' And just like that, the 2-year battle for Gottliebin's soul came to an end. And she lived the rest of her life in relative health, free from whatever ailments, physical or demonic, that had plagued her, until she died in 1872 at the age of 57. I'll admit, I'm not sure what to think about this case. First, the account is heavily dependent on Johann Blumhardt's eyewitness testimony, and while I won't go so far as to say he's an unreliable narrator, it's important to note his account sets him up as a great defender whose unshakable faith was a large reason for Gottliebin's deliverance. Second, certain details of this story seem fantastical, and I am always the first to confess that supernatural phenomenon is supernatural for a reason. It exists outside our natural understanding of the world around us. But there's something about it that just seems so far out there. Third, So many of Gottliebin's behaviors point towards mental and physical health struggles. On the other side, there's always the part of me that believes this was possible, even if unlikely. And no matter the veracity of the story itself, the details are genuinely scary. In fact, I had plans to record this episode at night after everyone went to bed. But the more I read, well, let's just say I decided to wait until the sun came up the next morning. As we close this episode of the Red Treehouse, we're left with these lingering questions. Was Gottliebin Dittus truly possessed by demons? Or were the scary phenomena caused by something else more natural? I've shared the story. Now you decide for yourself. I'm your host, Will. Thanks for joining me in the Red Treehouse.
You